Did you know that in the middle of World War II, one man stopped an entire battalion? Without a single shot fired, Thomas Hale achieved the impossible. This British radio technician was positioned far within the Ardennes forest, not as a combat soldier but as a communications specialist. He bore no weapons, carried no ammunition. Thomas had arrived at this remote outpost 3 weeks earlier, part of a small intelligence unit tasked with monitoring German communications. The dense forest provided perfect cover for their operations, but it also meant they were completely isolated from main Allied forces. Their bunker was camouflaged beneath thick pine branches and forest debris, invisible from above. Each day, Thomas would sit hunched over his equipment, listening to enemy chatter, decoding messages, and relaying crucial intelligence back to command. The weather had been particularly harsh that December. Snow fell constantly, and temperatures dropped well below freezing. The men huddled around their small heating stove, sharing rations and stories from home. Thomas often spoke about his wife Margaret and their young daughter Emily, showing worn photographs to anyone willing to look. He had been a language teacher before the war, specializing in German literature, which made him invaluable to the intelligence team. Then came that fateful night when German troops pushed forward through thick fog, catching his unit off guard in a devastating surprise attack. The casualties were severe. Thomas watched his comrades fall around him. The attack came without warning. Through the dense fog, muzzle flashes erupted like deadly fireflies. Shouts in German echoed through the trees as enemy soldiers advanced with ruthless precision. Thomas's commanding officer fell first, then the radio operator beside him. One by one, his friends and colleagues were cut down in the merciless assault that would change everything. Against all odds, Thomas made it through. Wounded but breathing, he managed to crawl to safety in a deserted bunker nearby. There, fortune smiled upon him. An operational enemy radio set sat waiting. Rather than attempting to reach Allied forces for rescue, Thomas made a bold decision. He began transmitting false orders using flawless German, a skill he'd acquired during his preparation for deployment. His deception was masterful. He issued contradictory commands, altered target coordinates, and misdirected heavy weapons fire. The abandoned German bunker reeked of stale cigarettes and unwashed uniforms. Maps covered in red markings hung on the concrete walls, showing troop movements and strategic positions. Thomas's shoulder throbbed from shrapnel, and blood seeped through his torn jacket, but adrenaline kept him focused. The radio equipment was more sophisticated than anything he had worked with before. Multiple frequency bands, encryption capabilities, and a powerful transmitter that could reach units across the entire sector. Thomas studied the German codebooks scattered across the desk, quickly memorizing call signs and authentication procedures. His years of studying German literature proved invaluable as he crafted convincing military communications. He adopted the stern, authoritative tone of a Prussian officer, complete with regional dialect and military jargon. His first transmission ordered artillery units to redirect their fire coordinates by several kilometers, sending shells into empty forest instead of Allied positions. As hours passed, Thomas grew bolder with his deceptions. He created fictional supply shortages, reported false intelligence about Allied troop movements, and even ordered competing German units to investigate each other for potential sabotage. He invented emergency situations that required immediate attention, splitting enemy forces and sending them on wild goose chases through the treacherous winter landscape. Each successful transmission boosted his confidence, and he began orchestrating an elaborate symphony of confusion that would tear the German battalion apart from within. For 72 hours straight, the German forces wandered aimlessly through the forest, mistakenly engaging their own supply convoys and attacking fellow soldiers. When Allied reinforcements finally broke through, they discovered the enemy battalion in total chaos and confusion. Thomas lay unconscious at his post, his grip still locked on the radio controls, digits welded to the equipment by the bitter cold. Military legends often speak of heroes who wield rifles and grenades. Yet sometimes, the greatest victories come from nothing more than a determined voice cutting through the darkness. The results of Thomas's psychological warfare exceeded even his wildest expectations. German units fired upon their own reconnaissance patrols, convinced they were Allied infiltrators. Supply trucks were ambushed by friendly forces who had received orders claiming the vehicles were captured enemy assets. Artillery batteries shelled their own command posts after receiving coordinates that Thomas had carefully manipulated. Communication networks collapsed as officers questioned every order, unsure which commands were legitimate and which were enemy deceptions. By the third day, the once disciplined German battalion had devolved into scattered, paranoid groups hiding throughout the forest. Soldiers deserted their posts, officers countermanded each other's orders, and entire squads became lost in the maze of conflicting instructions that Thomas continued broadcasting. The psychological pressure was overwhelming. Men who had fought courageously across Europe began to crack under the strain of never knowing who to trust or which orders to follow. When Allied forces finally arrived, they found a scene of unprecedented confusion. German soldiers were surrendering to each other, convinced their comrades were enemy agents. Equipment lay abandoned throughout the forest, and the chain of command had completely broken down. Thomas was discovered slumped over the radio, his body temperature dangerously low but still alive. Medics had to carefully warm his frozen fingers to release them from the transmission controls he had operated continuously for 3 days and nights. The intelligence officers who debriefed Thomas could hardly believe his account. A single man, armed with nothing but linguistic skills and psychological insight, had neutralized an entire enemy battalion without firing a shot. His story became legend among Allied forces, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is the human mind. Thomas returned home to Margaret and Emily, carrying with him the knowledge that heroism comes in many forms, and that victory can emerge from the most desperate circumstances through courage, intelligence, and unwavering determination.